Thank you to the organizers for inviting me to join this panel. I'm very humble. I'm not an expert on organoids, and so I had to find a way of kind of connecting to the discussion. And the contribution I'd like to make is basically to get us thinking a bit about the kind of ethics we need to develop in response to the development of brain organoids. And given that this group is an amazing assembly of experts who have delved in many different issues in different biomedical contexts, I thought perhaps we can together try to see what we can learn from past experiences and being involved in the development of ethics in different contexts to think about how we can imagine an ethics and the future of well-being in the context of brain organoids. So I guess I'm kind of going to make Sally's job easier or more complex because I'm basically going to try to get the discussion going. Oops. This. Okay, so thank you. Oops. Thank you again. And thanks to my team who makes all the research we do possible. And I think as we were seeing this morning, there are kind of two opposing views about the ethics of brain organoids to start off with. On the one hand, we have colleagues who think that there are really important new ethical problems calling for attention and scholarship because of notably the impact on humans and animals. And on the other side, we have colleagues who are arguing that we don't really need dedicated attention to this area because brain organoids are not posing any important new problem, or the technology is simply not ready for prime time. So therefore, we could simply rely on existing ethical frameworks. So this is part of the debate, as I mentioned. I think I'd like to get us thinking about how we can contribute together to this discussion, hoping to set the stage for this. So the way I'm going to do this is basically say a few things about the development of the field of neuroethics, in which I was involved in from the early days. And then I'm going to make the case for why imagination is so important, because I feel our imagination of the field of neuroethics was kind of hindered a bit along the way. And I'd like to bring this home at the end in the context of organoids. So neuroethics, on a personal note, is probably the reason, because I don't know much about organoids, probably the reason I was invited to this panel. And for many of us, I think when we think neuroethics, we think ethics of new neurotechnology, deep brain stimulation, functional MRI, neuropharmacology. And when we looked at the early days of the field of neuroethics, and we can see this in the Encyclopedia of Bioethics in Paul Wolpe's entry, basically he defined neuroethics as a content field, a field defined by the technologies it examines rather than any specific philosophical approach. So the field's distinctiveness was premised on this idea that neurotechnology touches upon the seat of personal identity and higher cognitive function, and therefore that's what kind of grounds it. However, early on in the field, there were many views about what was the goal or the vision of this field. Obviously, tackling challenges related to neuroscience, neurotechnology was one of them. But for example, in our work, we really tried to focus on the need for public dialogue and also addressing lingering ethical issues, especially with marginalized patient populations. And this was part of the work that Rocher funded, part of pragmatic neuroethics. And basically, there were others who argued that neuroethics was going to yield a new neuroscience of human morality and neuroscience of ethics. So, for example, Mike Gazzaniga, a cognitive neuroscientist, who argued, for example, that neuroethics should be much more than bioethics for the brain. It should be generating something like a brain-based philosophy of life. So very different account of neuroethics. And early on, the debate about how we should imagine neuroethics was present. I'm alluding here to one of the first papers we published, Judy Illes and I, which sparked this conversation, and we got a lot of criticism from colleagues saying, oh, neuroethics is potentially reinventing the bioethics wheel. Is it focusing on the trees but leaving out the forest? And so on. So this has been somewhat of an ongoing discussion, but the imagination of neuroethics as an ethics of neurotechnology really prevailed. That's really the dominant view of the field. And undoubtedly, that probably has some implicit, explicit implications. And some of those implications could be that we've left unattended certain situations. I'll give you just a few examples of things which I think have not really been on the radar screen of neuroethics. For example, the impact of digital technology on childhood and adolescence, disparities in access to neurological and mental health, the impact of climate changes on human flourishing and well-being. I must say Laura Cabrera, who's with us, is one of the exceptions in having developed the idea of an environmental neuroethics that connects those dots. And then even the opioid crisis is something that has not been so much on the radar screen, as impactful as it is, as we're seeing in North America. So basically, just the takeaway here is really, it's interesting to see that in the history of this field, there were many views, but it seems like we've kind of narrowed down on focusing on neurotechnology. Now, I want to now move on to the role of imagination in ethics. And basically, given how there were different visions of the field early on and how things have unfolded, I think it's a nice opportunity to step back and think, well, what's the role of imagination in ethics? How do we kind of embed different views of human flourishing and where we should go and the goals we should be pursuing? How do we incorporate that in our work in ethics? And I'm going to try to unpack this idea using explaining three simple ideas. One of them simply distinguishing morality from ethics. Second, making the point that ethics aims at human flourishing, and when it does, it taps into imaginative abilities. And even those abilities also tap into memory. I won't get into the detail of this morning, but I'll make briefly the point. And then finally, that the exercise of imagination is an ethical, but also deeply social and political process, which in practice is often restricted. Okay, and then I'll come back to organoids, but I'll make this detour. First, distinguishing ethics from morality. Basically, we know from Aristotle that human beings are social mammals. And we also know from contemporary neuroscience that the human brain has capabilities, given its complexity, for higher level cognition. So we're not only social beings, but we can be intelligent about our social behaviors and adaptive. A way to cash this out is to rely on the distinctions between system 1 and system 2 cognitive processes developed in behavioral economics and social psychology. And basically, you'll hear in a minute where I want to go with this. But basically, the system 1 processes are intuitive systems allowing us to get by in everyday life without actually doing too much extensive thinking. They're automated system relying on quick and fast frugal processes like heuristics, for example. Obviously, they can be biased. And on the other side, we have deliberate cognitive system, which require a lot of cognitive resources and thinking, explicit strategies, evaluating consequences, generating rules. And basically, what I want to get at is that human beings are kind of equipped with morality. They can get by in everyday life, most of the time dealing with each other, being compassionate, friendly, collegial enough so that things work out. So we have a kind of system one, but when we are faced with perplexing situations, that's where ethics comes in as a deliberate process, inquiry-based process, or a form of intelligence on our moral behavior. So morality is really what kind of grounds us as an organisms, feeds us in terms of providing us grounding in terms of our values and what matters to us. And ethics is this ability to adapt and adjust to different circumstances, challenging circumstances, and complex ones. So ethics, I want to add, also aims at human flourishing, and that involves imaginative abilities. Now, when I think of human flourishing, I have in mind contemporary models stemming from contemporary psychology. I like very much Carol Riss' model, which was extensively developed based on both theoretical and empirical work. And it encapsulates important dimensions such as autonomy, but also positive relationships with others, acceptance of oneself, and developing a constructive orientation in life. And you may think, well, that's kind of maybe a potentially Western model of human flourishing. And I think you're right. Although I think we also can find potentially bridges with other models. And here I'm just showing briefly the kind of working model of human flourishing or well-being developed by the Quebec and Labrador First Nations, which interestingly incorporates ideas such as the ability to act on one's environment, so empowerment, social networks are important, that's more or less positive relationships, but there are also other dimensions such as land that we don't see necessarily in other models. So the connection to land, which we're now recognizing with all the work in ecology, is so important for sustainability. So I won't make that point too much, but I think there's much to learn from sharing about different models of flourishing. Just to kind of move on, in a sense, this is very interesting and enriching. Ethics pushes us even further in empowering every one of us to ask really what's the meaning of our own lives, really. So yes, human flourishing and models and ideas, but ethics proposes to make life a project, to basically, as Socrates said, life without question is not a life worth living. So the idea that questioning and giving ourselves goals is important. And I think this is here where imagination plays a really crucial role. And I want to bow to the classic pragmatists like Dewey, for example, who already foresaw, actually based on the work of the utilitarians, that imagination played a really important role, notably in empathy. And Dewey defined deliberation as a rehearsal of competing lines of action. So imagination was fundamental to the ability to have ethical deliberations, because we need some kind of resource to think outside the box and get, our system one kind of working, system two, working to overcome the problems in which we are, right? To kind of imagine things differently. Now, I don't have too much time, that's why I put a bracket on that slide, but in an upcoming book, I'm proposing that basically morality is a lot about the is, and ethics is a lot about the ought, but there's also a temporal dimension to this in a way that the is really connected to episodic memory and situated memory, the memories of our life episodes. And ethics can be, or is proposed to be tooled by the idea of envisioning imagination as a scenario-based process of how we imagine things to be. And basically, ethics is a kind of ability to reconcile past and present in us and in our communities in ways that we bridge our current experiences with our aspirations for the future. Okay, so that was very quick on the role of imagination. Now I want to basically make the point that the exercise of imagination has often been constrained. And we know this from the minority rights movements in the 1960s, or women's rights movements, linguistic rights movements, and so on, which have made basically the point more obvious that, fortunately, in a sense, it is increasingly difficult to think about what is the good life for someone without engaging them in the discussion. Okay, so this is something now I think is increasingly recognized to be a fundamental takeaway. And there are scholars like Jasanoff and Kim who have also pushed this kind of at the political level in getting us to recognize how technologies shape visions of the future and how there's a political dimension to technologies. I'll skip this. Basically, just these kinds of insights have led my group increasingly to get involved into co-creative methods and living ethics. And Felix is actually leading one of those living labs at Université Laval, where we get people to engage in thinking and imagining solution in response to the problems they are facing. So the question, I guess, that I want to bring to forward for the next part of the talk is what and whose imagination is being mobilized in discussions, such as discussions about brain organoids. Which vision of human flourishing, which aspirations? And in a sense, can we open things up a bit or use this opportunity to open the discussion up and ask questions like the why, the what, the who's involved, and so on? This is what I want to do in my final minutes. So basically, in my case, based on the experiences in the field of neuroethics, but I'm gathering perhaps other people's experiences in doing work in bioethics. And plus maybe this idea about how imagination plays an important role in ethics. What can we learn to build an ethics of organoids? And what questions should we ask? And I'm putting these questions on the table, thinking I wish we would have asked more open-endedly these kinds of questions at the beginning of neuroethics and had the ability to take action on them. So first question is, why is a technology worthy of attention? Is it the biomedical science agenda? Is it really the impact of the technologies, the real world impact? Is it because this is a trend in ethics scholarship? What are the ethical questions? What are really the ethical questions at stake here? And according to which account of ethics? Whose views of ethics is kind of implicit or underlying this, and really about which aspects of moral life or human flourishing are these technologies impacting? Important question, I think, also is for whom are we doing this? Is it for lab scientists, for lay citizens, according to which and whose perspective, and who's included or excluded from these discussions, or in other words, whose imagination is being nurtured by the discussions? Who's involved? And when is the timing right? We heard about good anticipatory bioethics. I think it's a really interesting discussion point on how we do good anticipatory work in ethics. Is it now? Was it yesterday? Are we actually late in the game? Or should we kind of postpone ethical discussions because perhaps we'll be fueling the hype as bioethicists, talking about outcomes which do not really exist yet, and impact that has not materialized. And where does the technology raise ethical questions? Only in the high socioeconomic countries, or even in certain circles of those countries, certain groups? Is it in closed circles, in open forum? So where is this going on? So to wrap things up for this kind of holy talk, neuroethics, especially imagined as an ethics of neurotechnology, provides a specific backdrop for discussions about brain organoids. I think it's kind of shaping how we're coming to this. Ethics as a form of intelligence or inquiry aims at human flourishing in a kind of open-minded way, which mobilizes imaginative abilities. But the latter have often been constrained, leading to restricted human experiences when we think of the LGBTQ community, for example, or we heard about women's concerns in health, for example, yesterday. So this leads to asking questions about which experiences and which imaginations are reflected in current discussions of brain organoids. When we look at the literature, and basically, I think to open up the discussion, what can we learn and what can we bring as a group to better prepare for the future? So voilà, merci.